Thank you very much indeed, High Commissioner, for setting us off with a very clear and comprehensive outline of the political context within which the UK and the EU now find themselves. Now we turn to an academic analysis from Professor Jack Vowles. Jack will stay seated for here as he has a PowerPoint he'd like to show. Please enjoy our hospitality.
I'll stay seated if the microphone works, and obviously it does.
Thank you very much.
So, the 2015 British election. A very surprising result, given what the political polling was telling us immediately before the election. And one of the big questions that's now being debated is, was this a last-minute shift, or did the polls get it wrong? And until we know that, there are a lot of questions about the election that remain undecided. But in front of you, you can see a very nice graphic which gives you a nice image of the way that votes were distributed by constituency at the election. And as you can see, the size of each electorate is population weighted. So unlike most maps like this, where it's a sea of blue because the Labour constituencies are very much smaller because they're concentrated in urban areas, you can actually get much more of a sense of how it all fell into place. And clearly you can see that Scotland is almost uniformly SNP, and that it's quite remarkable how contiguous the support for Labour is. It comes in blobs, which gradually get more concentrated the further north you move. And that reflects considerable regional differences, clearly, in political loyalties, although a first-past-the-post electoral system, of course, exaggerates these. So, for example, I think the Labour vote in Scotland was about 24–25%, don't have the exact figure, but it was somewhere around there. And yet a first-past-the-post electoral system, of course, has given virtually all the seats to the SNP. So, if it was a last-minute swing, then what might have been the reason for that? And there is an interpretation which will be interesting to see whether it's borne out by the analysis. And the interpretation is simply this, that the Scots voted for the SNP, the English voted against it. And here you have a billboard which was placed in many of the marginal constituencies, which had Alex Salmond pinching some cash from someone's back pocket. And you probably can't read the text, but it says the SNP want 148 billion to support Miliband, vote Conservative. Now, this billboard was featured in a video cameo that appeared on the Guardian website, where one of their journalists went around the constituency of Nuneaton talking to voters. And the phrase down below, "If the Scottish get in with Labour, we are done for," is a pretty good reflection of the kind of conversations that he was having with most of the people who he talked to. There's another billboard that was out around about the same time, and here you have Ed Miliband sitting in Alex Salmond's pocket. And this kind of advertising can be very effective. It's straight out of the Crosby-Textor rule book. It's very powerful psychologically, and what we know about research in psychology now tells us that this kind of framing is really, really powerful. And all of this campaign was focused in those English marginal constituencies. Okay, so the electoral system. First past the post gave almost all the seats to the SNP in Scotland, but it also, on 36.9% of the votes, gave the Conservatives just over 50% of the seats. A workable majority in the short term, but it's vulnerable to by-elections, which do tend to chip away government majorities in a parliament the size of the UK's at 650 MPs. And also, it's susceptible to backbench rebellions, of which there have been increasing examples in the last term of Parliament in particular. And now, of course, without the Lib Dems, the government is even more vulnerable to backbench MPs that are close to UKIP in their political sentiments, if not their loyalties, making trouble for the government. So it's not necessarily going to be a stable single-party government. A majority government, this is one of the things that first-past-the-post systems are supposed to deliver, and one reason why we probably won't see electoral reform on the political agenda in the UK, despite the fact that UKIP and the Greens are calling for it for good reasons from their point of view. And there is, of course, a centre-right majority in the votes cast. If you add up the Conservatives and UKIP and the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland, you've got over 50% of the votes cast. So it's not the kind of election that you could say worked out wrong because of the electoral system, at least in terms of that overall verdict. The combined left and nationalist party vote only just over 40%. So it's not the kind of election that's going to give rise to huge campaigns for electoral reform, because for the most part the major parties are quite happy.